All right. So, hey, folks, good to see everybody today. I'm going to post up the recording again this afternoon. So this is basically week 4. If you caught up on other videos, or even if you haven't, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to jump in here without too much problem. Week 1, just kind of giving StrengthsFinder kind of background, kind of how I open when I'm teaching a StrengthsFinder workshop, the elements that go into some of that, kind of giving the bigger StrengthsFinder philosophy of how exactly do we figure out how our high performance was connected to emotional engagement, and how emotional engagement was tied to instinct. And so when it comes to Gallup's research with regards to what makes you a high performer, your likelihood of being high performing was directly connected to how well you understood your instincts, of your patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior, and then knowing that, put them to work with great intent. Also, kind of during chaos right now, like this season, it's also helpful to know how to use your themes to manage your own insanity, how to use these things as tools to manage your own challenges and chaos, because there's tips and tricks kind of into that. Last week, we started diving into themes. I think we covered about 6. We're going to do the same thing again this week. When I teach StrengthsFinder themes, again, as a reminder, we're thinking a lot about the essence. I'll give you the essence of the theme, kind of what is the core driver of it. I'm going to also give you pieces around communication and decision-making. And so actually, I'll put these out here. Let me get my share on here. Let's do this. Oh. Okay. Sweet. So I'm going to give you the essence. And then we'll do communication. We'll do decision-making. And then the dark side for each theme, okay? And so the dark side for each piece, and kind of as these go together, this over here. So that is what our approach is going to be here. And then try to move all my windows around. There we go. So within all of this, I actually was thinking this morning, when it comes to actually sharing these things out with you guys, one thing I would do is that I want to give you a couple themes to show you the difference between how themes show up when they're similar. Because last week, I think one of the things we mentioned was responsibility. We covered responsibility last week. Somebody give me a head nod if we did. Okay, responsibility. Responsibility as a StrengthsFinder theme, again, remember, responsibility is going to be about ownership. Ownership. Now, owning things psychologically. So I own. But they're also known for hard work. Lots of hard work. So the way I describe it, again, this is my language. Responsibility's cousin is achiever. That's my scribbles for achiever. Okay? So here's the deal. Responsibility and achiever both like to work hard. They're both hardworking. So people will I will meet people all the time who get the results and like, oh, I'm so shocked I didn't have blah, blah, blah. I didn't have this theme. I didn't have this, because they associate certain actions with certain themes. Responsibility and achiever, here's the deal. The behavior is the same, but the motivation is different. The motivation is what sets it apart. And so that's part of this process, is that the struggle is how then do you understand, because remember, StrengthsFinder themes are about thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And so when it comes to thoughts, feelings, and behavior, each part is valuable. And so each part, there we go, hold on, I have participants coming in here. Got people stuck in the waiting room, guys, sorry. Zoom's changes aren't always useful. Let's see, Terry. Yeah, okay, so when it comes to understanding thoughts, feelings, and behavior, we often focus on the behavior. We focus in on what we're doing, ignoring the fact that the things you think, as well as the things you're feeling, end up being valuable. So for responsibility, we end up focusing in more and more on what is the window. We focus in on the execution, but responsibility, it's about the satisfaction of keeping a promise. So for responsibility, it's about promise. Achiever, it's just about the joy of work. Joy of work. And so at the end of the day, that's something to keep in mind. As we're going through themes, you can have themes that the behavior looks similar, but the feeling is different. And so understanding, that's what sets some of these things apart, is understanding the motivation. And so in the midst of all of this, I want to compare some of those. So one of the ones I'm going to hit next is arranger. I want to give arranger, and I'm going to contrast that with strategic. Did we do strategic last week? Did we do strategic? No. Okay. We'll start with arranger then. So arrangers are conductors. People with arranger, they like to conduct. Hold on a second, make sure everybody in here, I have more participants waiting, sorry. People with arranger, they're conductors who are kind of juggling multiple variables. So it's juggling, but also planning. When I talk about arrangers, I will say things like they're the air traffic controllers of the world. They got multiple variables going in multiple ways, but here's the deal. They have one very clear purpose. Things in the air have to get to the ground. Things in the ground have to get to the air. But arrangers are jugglers. Arrangers are naturally trying to pull all the different pieces together. And so they're conductors. And so when it comes to that, think about all the elements that go into a script of an orchestra. You have timing, you have the actual composition, but you have the instruments, you have timing, you have the feedback that's happening, and you're directing it all as you go. An arranger is juggling all these different pieces together. So as long as the finish, and here's a big piece, the essence is juggling, it's kind of planning. But when it comes to communication, arrangers are going to ask questions about the finish line. What exactly is it you want? Because that's the key to an arranger's planning. The finish line, actually for responsibility as well. Responsibility and arranger are all about the finish, because responsibility is going to finish at that finish line having no more resources left. They're exhausted, they're done. They cross the finish line, they flop over dead, having kept their promise. Arrangers, they end up juggling their plan to land at the finish line. One is about planning, one is going to be about resource, but both want the finish line. So arrangers, you may find in the process that what you do is you kind of circle the idea to make sure you understand it. And then while you're trying to understand that idea, you start to ask questions, then you direct, then you're like, I'm involved. So when it comes to communication, you communicate asking questions about the finish line and all the variables. When it comes to decision-making, arrangers, you're gonna want to basically really go, what is the knowns and what is the finish line that kind of gives me the target for the knowns. So things that you can understand all the pieces of, a piece of music that you get, that's the one that you'll pick in decision-making. The dark side of arranger is the ability is at times, you'll over believe in your own story and your ability to manage things. You'll take on too much. You will over juggle. You'll believe, oh yeah, I can juggle 5 basketballs, a bowling ball, and give me the chainsaw too. I can juggle anything. And so your faith and your ability to juggle is a little bit too much. And so just so you know, arrangers, you may find that you also are very flexible as long as the finish line doesn't change. But here's the thing, if you suddenly find you're inflexible, that is a sign that you are tired. Your flexibility is natural. When you begin to get inflexible, where you're like, you can't give me one more thing, use that as a sign of I'm exhausted. Does that make sense? Thumbs, hands, react. Yeah, it's a reaction button now too. But arranger, here's the deal. Arranger is more like what we in the regular world call strategic. Here's why this matters. When I worked for Hewlett Packard, our strategic plan was our long-term plan, right? Oh, it's strategic importance, strategic. So then when people hear the word strategic in StrengthsFinder, that's what they think. Oh, it's the long-term plan. It's the big picture. No, Strategic and strengths finder is short-term navigation. Navigating. Okay? And so it's this navigation approach. People with it's short-term navigation, meaning it's navigating roadblocks. The essence is navigating roadblocks. They don't like things that are backed up. They want to get around anything that's in their way. So they constantly assess, select, strike. These are the people who pick others to race while driving. These are the people who are constantly assessing which checker at the grocery store takes too much time. They're like, never let these people ride in the passenger seat of your car. Because all they do is say, well, why didn't you change lanes? Why didn't you jump in here? Why didn't you do this, this, and this? And you're like, well, because there was no spot there. Well, there was going to be a spot. Why did you do this? There's going to be a hole. You're like, going to be a hole. Are you out of your mind? But that's strategic because their mind is assess, select, strike. So the essence is make a decision quickly to remove a roadblock. Make a decision quickly to remove a roadblock. So the good news is that when it comes to communicating, just so you know, they often communicate a decision they're already in process. So communication, hey, here's what you need to do. Remember my example from a number of weeks ago where I said our StrengthsFinder themes are a filter on our mouth, our ears, and our brain. They filter what comes out of us. They filter the information that comes in, and they filter how we think and how we choose. So for strategic, this is classic, especially. Strategic is a pretty high theme, meaning it shows up a lot. This is the theme that when everybody's feeling so like when you're sitting there and you're talking to someone else and they don't have strategic, and again, they're describing their terrible, awful day, and what they're looking for is the emotional feedback, but instead you respond with, well, just stop doing that thing that's bothering you. That is strategic for love. Because for strategic, their brain goes, what's the greatest thing I could give them? I'm hearing a sad story. Well, instead of me giving them emotion, which I don't have up front, I have strategic. Instead, I'm going to give them the answer to their problem. Stop doing something. And you're like, what? That's strategic because they are solving a problem. They're naturally going, how do I problem solve? How do I give you the thing you need? Okay. And so with this, so the good news is you make decisions quickly, you navigate around problems fast, you prioritize things that remove roadblocks. The dark side though is this. You wait if it's not a problem. You won't do something until it's bad enough. Oh, we should really do this. Oh, I got other things to worry about. I got other things that are problems. And so people will actually say, I think I've said this before. I had a woman at a workshop in Michigan say to me one time, she said, my husband's strategic shows up in the fact that he won't take out the trash if I don't light it on fire first. It's this idea that until it's a burning problem, you won't do it. Strategic, are you waiting too long? Also, solve the right problem. Strategic, solve the dark side is that they always deal with problems that are in proximity. You focus is always going to be the closest. That could mean, though, that you're missing the longer term solution because you're obsessed with the problem right in front of you. So there's many times a strategic that in a meeting, strategic is going to say, I'm so frustrated. Why in all these meetings do we have to have such a long conversation? The meeting always ends exactly where I know it's going to end. We could just skip the meeting and have me answer the question and do what I want them to do. And I'll often say to a leader, you're solving the wrong problem. This is the big phrase, solve the right problem. Strategic, solve the right problem. Yes, if the only issue was making a decision about this one problem, fine. But unless you're an individual contributor, what you need to know is you need to solve two problems. Having the right decision, but having the team develop their ability to make the decision. See, you're the leader of the team. You don't want to have to keep answering because strategic, you put yourself at the center of every single problem. You would have to be everywhere all the time if you being the only source of the answer is what's key. The issue here is you've got to solve the right problem. So right now, you guys know I'm doing pretty much nonstop Olympic coaches, both winter and summer. We're like day to day. I've told you about this. One of the things we keep saying is a lot of the coaches I'm working with now, they started as athletes. And so when they're coaching, a lot of times strategic and restorative too, they're seeing athlete performance because they know performance, and they're like, you should do this. And I said, you telling them what to do is solving the problem of the performance. It's not solving the problem of the athlete. Why didn't your athlete see that error? Solve both problems. If strategic is dominant, you have to watch out because it's short-term navigation. So a ranger is more juggling. Arrangers are going to be kind of more focused in on what are the bigger plans, the larger things. Strategic is, let's make the decision quick, let's get moving, let's driving. Watch out, strategic. Your speed ends up being the biggest issue. You're so quick, we don't often know what you're thinking because it happens so fast. If it's life and death, fine, decide it for me. But if it's not, what about bringing me along? That's part of the challenge. Any questions, comments, or reaction on strategic or ranger? Is that good? Okay, sweet. Katie Hari, could you give me another theme?
Another theme? Well, Kate in the very beginning said intellection.
Intellection, perfect. So that'll give me intellection, and I'll do intellection and learner. Did we do learner last week? Somebody's got to keep me honest, so I make sure I cover them all. Intellection. All right, thank you, Katie. Intellection. People with intellection. The essence, right? Here's the thing. Remember all the themes in the domain of strategic thinking. So there's different. Each one has a different focus. The essence of intellection is break it down. Break it down, meaning the ideas. You got to break down ideas to their core. There isn't necessarily a drive of certain things have to be a certain way. It is more about how do I take an idea, break it into chunks, break it into small pieces. And so for intellection, their mind is running pretty much nonstop. So even as you're talking about one topic, in the back of their brain, they say things like, my brain is like Grand Central Station. It goes and goes and goes and goes, and it's nonstop all the time, breaking ideas down as trains go in and out of the station. So in the back of their head, they're processing things that aren't even happening in the front part of their brain. So their brain is trying to go, I want to understand it, break it into the core element, find the core issue. So this is happening, but it's also one of the key things you need to know about intellection is when it comes to communication, comms, they don't. Now, obviously that's a big deal. That's a joke more than anything. But intellection, we live in an extroverted world where we assume if you're thinking it, surely you'll say it. That's actually not true at all. Most thinking themes that are dominant thinkers, they think things and almost never say them out loud. Intellection, analytical, deliberative, especially cautious themes like those three, they will process data, but not necessarily express it. And so what ends up happening is they're thinking, but they may never do anything with it. Now, I'm going to break this. Now, it depends on your other themes, because I'll give you learner in a second, and that'll have a completely different tilt in some ways. When it comes to intellection, though, they break into pieces and parts. Just so you know, part of this whole process as well for them is that learners, intellection, you may find that you have trouble falling asleep at night. Part of the challenge of falling asleep is that as the day's activity wind down, your brain ramps up because there's less to keep it distracted. And so your mind starts to race and wander and kind of run. If you have intellection, analytical, deliberative, sometimes connectedness, I hear this too. You may also find that you wake up in the middle of the night because your brain solves problems while you sleep. And it wakes you up to tell you that it's done. You need to have something near your bed that you can capture that information, capture that data, because your mind will let go of it once it's woke you up because it thinks it's finished. In fact, writing things down is key for intellection, which is interesting because your mind is really good at holding data, especially under stress when information is difficult to process. Your mind will spin in an effort to make sure the idea is embedded. You need to capture it. That's the only way to make your mind stop racing. If your brain knows that the information is captured somewhere, it stops the spinning process. So bullets, if you have trouble falling asleep, I say do a brain dump onto a notepad before bed. Don't make lists. Like just try to get it out. Like I'll sit there and do 200 or 300 words just typed into my computer that don't make any kind of sense really at times, because it'll shut my brain down. Intellection, documentation is everything because it allows you to get more rest. The dark side of intellection is too much thinking, which is also a sign of fatigue. I'll ask people with intellection all the time, do you ever get stuck in a thinking loop where you just think about the same thing over and over and over again? And I often say, are you thinking endlessly because you haven't found the solution, or are you thinking endlessly because you don't like the solution you found? That's a sign of fatigue. Because at its core, intellection, all they care about is getting to the root problem. They're like the root issue, the core idea. And they're like, oh, yep, there's the core idea. I found it. I can stop. Well, the problem is for intellection is that if you get to the core idea and your system and your world are so crazy and exhausted and jacked up, you're like, that can't possibly be the solution. There has got to be something easier. So you analyze it again and get to the same solution. That's the sign of fatigue. See, your brain is doing what it does naturally, but your body doesn't think it can meet the challenge. So it goes around again. So if you find yourself in a thinking loop on certain ideas, use your strengths finder theme as a dashboard of, I need some time. 45 minutes alone every day. If you're a dominant intellection, analytical, deliberative, 45 minutes of silence where nobody talks to you. For a lot of people, this used to be a car ride home. I know people that go and hide in their closets so the kids won't bother them. They usually make this agreement with their spouse or partner. You got to make sure you do the work to actually get the time by yourself, because that's the key to sanity. If you don't have time to think right now, that's a real problem. I've got clients who work in settings, they're in their mid-20s and they're actually still at home. They one of them lives with their family in Michigan, and she's like, I'm all day on Zoom calls, and then I'm in my parents' house as well, like with my 5 brothers and sisters and all those other things, and it's like getting time alone is really difficult. That's part of what drives the stress. So each one of our themes have a need. Intellection has a need to be alone. Questions on intellection from anyone? Just give it on mute if you need to. But here's the difference. So thinking themes, right? Themes in a domain. So the difference though with intellection I want to kind of give another piece, is learner. So if the essence of intellection is breaking it down, the essence of learner is applying it. Learner is thinking to accomplish something, to do. And in fact, it is often the process of having to do something that sparks the learning. People with learner have the ability to self-educate. They have the ability to start the process of expression. They have the ability to go, this is how you begin. For a lot of us in the world, having never done something before ends up being the part where we go, I imagine that, Matt Mendoza suddenly says to me, hey, Mike, let's imagine Matt has learner. He's like, Mike, let's just go do this. I'm like, but Matt, I've never done that before. Matt, if he has learner, a lot of times will say, so what? See, because for learners, having never done something is not a barrier to whether or not you do it. For the rest of us, you may be like, well, I have no experience in that. How would I know how to start? Learners will often say, well, just go do it. Here's the thing. If you have learner in your themes, your special sauce is the ability to teach yourself how to accomplish almost anything, or at the very least, convince yourself that you can do that. Here's the other piece of this, though. Learners often then say, wait, I have to actually tell you how to do every step? No, learners, you don't have to do that. Here's the deal. What I have found is this. Learners, if you would just do this next piece, here's the thing. Say to me, hey, Mike, start here and here. So my phrase for learners is always, give them the first 2 steps. Hey, Mike, start here and here. If you still have problems, come back to me. I promise you, 9 times out of 10, they'll never come back. They won't have to come back to you. Because the real barrier is the starting. That's what I have found over time, is that if you actually give your team or your people you're working with steps 1 and 2, Oh, because we can all self-educate. We do it all day long. The challenge is that starting piece. Give me steps 1 and 2, and then learner kicks in. But learner, it's not just about accomplishment. It is literally a theme where it comes to where thinking and learning can be life-giving. If you have learner and you get stuck in a really bad job situation and you can't figure out how to find the next job, the answer is almost always go get another degree. Because under stress, your brain's like, I better go back to grad school. I better get my PhD. That's the answer. It'll all become clear if I could just get my PhD. That's like how you default. And so your brain, because your brain understands that, and it would be exciting. So your answer to any business, to any personal, professional challenge is new degree. It could be, but I would say, do you know why you need the degree? Do you know why you need that challenge? And so for a learner, also, the act of like planning the vacation can be more energizing than taking the vacation. Like picking the city, researching the place. Right now, I have a little bit of learner, my top 10 enough. Last night, I started picking resorts for fall vacation of 21. Like, I'm not even kidding. I'm going, okay, 16 months from now, I'm gonna be probably in Costa Rica, somewhere else. And I'm like, this is what the flights look like right now. These are the resorts that I'm hoping will still be open. Because the act of thinking and planning through that, for a learner, the research, the planning is life-giving. So even in courses like this, you're like, oh, it's something new to learn. Intellection, it's about core, breaking ideas down. Learner, it is about applying. The dark side is when you become basically an intellectual hoarder. You ever know people that you're working with and they go, man, I'm learning the most interesting things. And you're like, what did you do with them? If you're doing with these interesting things is significantly less than the learning, that's part of the challenge. This has to have an application over time. Like, don't just start learning Italian, become proficient at Italian and then move on. Push yourself to have an ending, push yourself to have an out, because there is this satisfaction. Learning without application doesn't work. Also, the dark side, here's the other piece, boredom. Learners get bored every 18 to 24 months. And so if you don't have more dynamic challenges, just so you know, your resume is gonna look really sketchy. It's gonna look like you changed jobs too much. So here's what you do. When asked, man, you've changed jobs a lot, which by the way, is something you will almost never hear anymore in interviews. That's an old school mentality. People are not asking about how much you change jobs anymore. So don't even entertain that. But when you do, say, you know what, I've learned that my capacity to self-educate means that I'm really good at taking on new roles. And once I get extremely proficient and I help the team succeed, I like to find new challenges. I need a really challenging and here's the phrase, challenging and dynamic environment. That's the reason why I've changed jobs so much. After I solve a problem, I look for more dynamic challenges. And they go, wow, that's brilliant. And that's why your resume is so varied every 18 to 24 months. Questions about learner? Katie, give me another theme.
Developer, please.
Oh, developer. All right. Okay, developer. The essence of developer is progress. Okay, progress. Any kind, emotional progress. So think about progress, meaning incremental, small, measurable, moving pieces forward. So that means that they want to, when it comes to teaching, and they want you to understand a new idea, how can they give you small pieces that move your understanding forward? When it comes to big challenges, like really big problems to solve, they don't go, we have to eat this whole elephant in one bite. No, we eat it in small pieces at a time, one bite at a time, right? That's the big joke. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. For developer, that means then you have it, but here's an essence of this as well with the progress. To make progress, you then have to understand these big things in their smallest slices. Part of your genius is that you understand the small components that are foundational to big ideas. Whereas others will say, well, that's so minuscule. That's so small. That doesn't matter. You're like, but it's 1 millimeter better than it was. One of my old housemates was an ICU, a surgical ICU nurse in St. Paul years ago. And I said, how does developer show up for you? He had developer pretty high. And he's like, I see it every night at work. And I was like, what? How? He's like, I measure my nightly progress in the surgical ICU in millimeters of mercury. And I was like, what does that mean? If you know anything about nursing, you know, the blood pressure cuff, sphygmomanometer, its measurement is, the number you get is actually measured in millimeters of mercury. He's like, the doctors would tell me if they needed blood pressure in their patient to go up, down, or be stable every night when they would go off shift. He worked overnight. He's like, my job was, I wanted the blood pressure to go, even the smallest of measure, in the right direction. He's like, that's my developer. He's like, I needed that progress. So incremental improvement. Now, that makes you really great at teaching fundamentals. We find, they found in Gallup's book, Teach With Your Strengths, that educators with developer express significantly high professional satisfaction in teaching under high school, like junior high under, because they believe they're putting in foundational elements. Maximizer, more senior high school, because they liked taking foundational elements and making them bigger and better, and kind of creating high performance out of the foundational pieces. So for developer, JV coach, you know, for a JV basketball coach in sports, the junior varsity basketball coach is the coach who teaches the kids how to dribble with their mouth closed. That's success, okay? The varsity coach is the one who says, you can dribble, I'm gonna make you the world's greatest shooter. So it's a difference. But the maximizers often struggle, unless they have developer in their profile, to break into pieces. They don't want to have to teach the fundamentals. They like working with teams that are already further ahead. So developer, progress is important. You like fundamental pieces, but here's the deal, developer. Developers, you may find that you are extremely patient with people you think do not know any better. So when you're teaching something you care about, you're really patient with people you think are newbies. You're extremely patient with people you think don't know any better, but you have no patience for those you think should. I wanted to deal with Coca-Cola years ago. And like somebody's like, because they're like, with this, based on this theme. I'm doing a one-on-one. It was an introduction. And they're like, well, we heard you the strengths whisper, sit down, tell me something. It was this head of HR in Atlanta. And he was like, yeah, this is great. But I heard you can really deep dive a profile. He's like, he basically like dared me to like palm read, which I think is stupid. I call it the party trick. It's whatever. And I was there and I was like, I looked at his profile. He had learner and developer in his profile. And I said, I'll bet, and this guy's a senior HR person. I said, I'll bet you try to teach all the employee orientation and onboarding awards, the onboarding programs. Like when you're new to a company, the onboarding at Coca-Cola. He was like, he all lit up. He's like, yes, I just won a professional achievement award for all my time and effort of teaching and creating the onboarding curriculum for every new employee at headquarters here. I was like, that's great. And I'm a crazy man, you guys. I have command, so I'm like super, and sometimes I have activator, so my mouth gets ahead of me. And I said, so you really love teaching? I'm like, yeah, I can see that, the fundamental classes. I said, but I bet you're pretty hard on your kids. And he was like, my wife and I had a fight this morning. I have twin 16-year-old sons. Why do they keep making the same mistakes? And I laughed, and he laughed. Thankfully, he took it. He took it well. He was like with me. I said, here's the deal. I said, you're hard on your kids because they have had a lifetime of living with you. They should know better, right? The new employees, when they're getting educated, you put them in the bucket of, oh, they have no experience. So here's the deal, developers, you're patient with me right now when I ask the first time. If I ask you the same questions a year from now, you're like, we had this conversation. So we make the assumption about how patient you are, but the reality is on the other side is you're like, no. You need growth. You need to progress. You need to actually be moving along. And so that's part of the deal here is that Progress matters. And so when it comes to communication, you break it into small pieces. When it comes to decision making, you basically prioritize things that are moving. But there's also a people element. I will say though, in my experience, the dark side is that under fatigue, you find the small pieces in the opposite direction. I call this the staying with the screaming, verbally abusive boyfriend or girlfriend for that matter. Oh, well, she only yells at me 3 days a week. I'm only miserable on Fridays because that's his busy day. I'm only miserable. I'm like, what does that have to do with developer? Well, think of it. If I told you, hey, I'm going to introduce you to the greatest person ever, and she or he is only going to scream at you 3 days a week, you'd be like, no way. So no one enters a relationship going, oh, totally, I'd be totally okay with that. But developer over time, you'll go, well, I'm only miserable this much. Well, there are only really bad performers on these days. And if you don't watch out, over time, that grows and expands. Your acceptance of small measures can work against you as well as work for you. When it comes to moving forward, developer, you do great at moving pieces and chunks forward. But if you are too tired to have to confront something, you'll take slices in the opposite direction. Well, it really was just a convenience this once. Even though in your gut, it's really hard. So much like a ranger who juggling and having variety in being flexible in your planning is a sign of your strength, let it be a sign of your fatigue when you stop being flexible. For developers, when you start making excuses, well, it's only bad this much, but it's only difficult. You're starting to accept smaller and smaller pieces. That can be the dark side, developer. Be aware, when are you settling? But that's just my own opinion. So, developer. Can I do maximizer to go with developer? Jenny has a question.
Mike, can you elaborate on decision making, please?
Decision making, it's about progress. So it comes back to the progress thing as well. When it comes to deciding, you'll be like, okay, I can see, because it's about seeing it, I can see how this moves things forward. So if it has a visibility of this decision would move it forward, that's the decision we're going to make. But if it's foggy and you're like, I can't see how any of these decisions would move us, you feel like you don't want to make a decision. You only want to choose the one that you're like, oh, that clearly. So right now, for developer, from now until the end of May, the decision making is really crazy for you because it's hard to know what action will have progress when the world turns back on. So your brain is going, which one would actually be the one that would move us? Does that sound good? Cool. Can I do maximizer to kind of go with this because they're similar? The essence of maximizer is, it's kind of it's maximizing. It's like getting the best. People with maximizer want to get the best out of themselves, out of others, out of a plan, get the best out of their time. They want to get the best out of an opportunity, the best out of a moment. And so this can be a coach who knows how to extract potential out of an athlete. It can also be someone who's trying to, suck the life out of an experience. This is a weird one. I remember doing a conference for, you guys know, and even on this call, we have, I have friends from all different walks, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, other things, but I remember doing it, working with a church a number of years ago in San Diego. And we had this whole plan and it was an event. It was a volunteer event. We were doing a training for a volunteer event and everything had to move like clockwork for like 3 straight days, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday. And Friday night we get there and the head pastor was like, yeah, we're going to open with some music. And this little neighbor kid named Phil Wickham is going to do our worship for us, our music. He's up and coming. He's a really great guitar player. And again, if you guys know Christian music at all, Phil became really big. Phil was a kid in our neighborhood. And so he was so good. Well, the lead guy at the church, he was a maximizer. So when 2 songs sounded really, really good, he suddenly decided to throw the entire schedule off tilt because well, we can do 2 or 3 more songs, can't we? Phil's music is so great. This music is so good. Let's do more of that. And he literally, because he wanted to get the most out of this really great music experience, he sacrificed the rest of the schedule that night. We had to juggle, because if 1 song was great, 4 songs must be awesome. And so people will say, if only I had 5 more minutes. So Maximizer, at sometimes you can go, I want to maximize something. The trick, some of the dark side a little bit, I haven't got to yet, is that it can bleed into other things. You can go, man, I get so focused on maximizing right now that I ignore things that are in different moments. My obsession with the moment I'm in can make me blind to the cost of that moment other times. Maximizers, though, your ability to spot talent. You see potential. You see what's possible. Some of you, when it comes to shopping, you instinctively know that you're like, man, Marshalls, TJ Maxx, Nordstrom Rack, you're like, that's a $500 coat that's down to 20 bucks. It's ugly as sin and I'll never wear it, but man, it's a great deal. Others of you will go a whole different direction. You're like, I would never shop at a discount place. I only buy quality. That's okay too. But maximizers, you have a high expectation for yourself and others. But part of the tension is the tension of perfection. I will have maximizers say to me, the fact that I achieved my goals typically tells me I didn't set them high enough. And so imagine you're leading a team and you're like, I'm just gonna use even numbers. Hey, we're gonna close out 100 new projects this quarter. And the team pushes and pushes and they get to 100. And then they're so excited. Yay, Jessica, I made it to 100. Look at us. Marcia, Kate, great. Oh, it's so wonderful. We did this. But then they turn to you and you're like, see, we should have said 105. And they're disappointed. And they're like, what? Why aren't you satisfied? Maximizers as team leads, you're accused of not being satisfied because you almost never are. Feel this tension between your goal and the reality. Like you're almost never going to be able to close it. If your maximizer's functioning, you're almost never going to feel like that gap is closed. So how do you then make peace with it? Especially maximizers, if this is turned internally, you can beat yourself up. Oh, am I as good as I possibly could be? Right? Developer goes to bed at night going, God, please let me have finished this day better than I started. Maximizers go to bed at night saying, God, was I everything I could possibly be? And so they feel a different tension. Maximizers, though, when it comes to communication, they communicate high standards for comms. So they love to talk to people that are all about high standards. They join your team based on their high standards. What demotivates them is when you lower your standard. If you're like, well, we really only thought we'd get 75. So the fact that we got 75 is great. Maximizers is like, I joined the team that signed up for 100. When you lower your bar, so do I. Maximizers, your energy drops every time someone lowers their expectations. Decision-making, again, it comes back to the high standards. Decision-making is about performance. Which one has the greatest likelihood of performance? Which one will get us the greatest upside on potential, the maximized kind of impact? And when it comes to the dark side specifically, perfection, also delay. Maximizers, you can end up delaying where you put off because, quote, if I just had more time or more resource or more, your brain says, well, there's a perfect opportunity. And so this is why I have clients with Maximizer who they keep starting business. They start businesses they can't finish because as soon as they realize they're not going to achieve the thing in their head, they bail. They're going, I'm out. It can't be as good as I thought it would be. When I find the perfect idea, it'll be great. When I find the perfect opportunity, maximizers, you've got to learn to be able to step into roughly right and the unknown a little bit. Okay? I'm gonna keep poking Katie as my navigator. What do I got, Katie? What's next? Give me another one.
So Marcia brought up input also as it contrasts to learner? We can do
Oh,
input.
yeah, sure. Totally. Input.
Hey, can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah, Carlton, go for it.
For Maximizer, when there are like big problems come up and there's an unknown,
yeah,
what would be a typical response?
When the problems come up, so the biggest challenge they face is when they have no, the unknown ends up being a challenge when they don't have a framework for how to measure it. It's the measurement of performance that's the problem. And so if you find yourself locked down, you're like, I'm in a new world where I have no measure of what the bar I'm trying to achieve looks like. You basically have to stop and maximizers have to call out the fact that they don't know what game they're playing, and then find the closest proximity and use the bar from that. Well, so right now for people, I'm saying, okay, how did you survive 2008? Now this is completely different, but well, here's what we did. We did this, this, and this, and that's how we got through it. Okay, so let's start with that. At least it gives maximizers something to work against. And so you find the closest proximity and you go from there. But what you're feeling is, man, I don't know what the game, I don't know what sport I'm playing, so I don't know the rules. And so cobble together the rules the best you can.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. Input as a theme that is thinking. Input is a weird little theme though. Input is basically the ability to research. It's capacity to retain. Now, retention could be in your head. It could be in your basement. The thing you're retaining could be names, dates, facts, and figures. It could be your great Aunt Ida's, I don't know, Beanie Baby collection. It doesn't matter. Input always ties into something else. So people with input, if you have input, if learner is thinking for application and intellection is thinking to break ideas into their core, input is simply intellectual Velcro. So input is information, so it's information that sticks. And so you may find you don't know where your car keys are and you still forget things, but you will remember something that you read in a random article that was a link to another article 4 years ago, and it suddenly comes up in conversation. What is interesting is I have found that input can, if you have relational themes, communication, connectedness, empathy, positivity even, and you have input, this collecting shows up in the fact that you remember random things like the clothing other people were wearing at different moments in your life. You'll remember having gone to, like, it's so weird, I can literally in my head still see a sweater and a weird jacket that my sister-in-law had who went to Alpine one time, apple picking. Because my communication and input have tied in together. So input is a gathering of something. But I also know people with input, intellection, deliberative, who will remember, they can off the top of their head spit out exchange rates and loans and the current, like they'll have read something about the financial market and they can suddenly tell you exactly what the current, Fed interest rates are, because input has that ability. So it connects to other themes, it's research and it's capacity. So the dark side, so when it comes to decision-making, input doesn't really have a decision-making theme component to it. It informs almost any other decision-making theme. It's the only theme that's a measure of capacity. So the decision-making is gonna be about whether or not you have a lot of good data. Is it well-researched? So volume of data ends up mattering. When it comes to communication, it's texture. Communication for comms, they provide texture, like little details that kind of make it clear. Decision-making, is there information? Is there research? The dark side, you can lose hours on the internet because at the bottom of every article is a button that says see related articles. The connecting, and so you look up and you've been on the internet for 15 hours because you mentally followed the rabbit hole of new ideas, okay? And so input is a little unique in that way, but it typically ties in to thinking themes, but also some relational themes at times. Cool. I got about another 5 or 6 minutes. What else have I got, Katie?
Can you do empathy in 5 to 6 minutes?
Yeah, we could do empathy. That'd be great. How about I'll do empathy and part of include if I can get to it before we got to sign off here. Okay, empathy. The essence of empathy is emotional intelligence. Okay, I also say this, thermometer. Now, I'm going to throw an includer while I do this. I describe empathy as an emotional thermometer. I describe includer as a thermostat. Thermostat. Think about the difference between those things. A thermometer reflects temperature. A thermostat reflects temperature and alters it. Empathy sees a child alone in the lunchroom or a kid sitting by themselves at school, all alone. Empathy goes, oh, that kid must feel bad. So their insides, empathy, start to reflect, if I was in that situation, how would I reflect? And all my emotions start firing. And so I feel what the other kid feels on the inside of me. Includer says, that kid is sitting all alone. I start to feel what that little kid feels. And then I go, I need to have that kid not feel alone. I go get the kid and give them somebody to sit with. I include them. Empathy reflects emotional temperature. Includer reflects and then acts on it. It takes it in. So one is more of an awareness, and it's the ability to emotionally mirror the other person. Includer is aware and then does. It takes action on it. So they're going to look very similar, but what drives it is includer wants to pull in, they want to pull in from the margins, pull in from the outside. They say, who's on the outside? So for includer, I'll go back and forth between these two. For includer, they pull in from the outside. Empathy simply wants to reflect what is going on in the inside of the other person. That's satisfying enough. So one is simple awareness. One has awareness with action. What is interesting is that empathy, to go back to empathy again, empathy, when it comes to communication always focuses in on people, right? Remember when we talked about relational themes, we called this glue, these themes are glue and grease. Empathy is a theme that helps you understand, oh gosh, Emily is feeling this. Sean is feeling this. You know, Justin's feeling this. Oh, because empathy, you literally spin out your, it's like you spin out your core. It's not literal, I guess. You spin out your core and put someone else's in and then say, oh, in that situation, I would be feeling da, 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 da. So that's why the news is so difficult right now. Seeing bodies in a refrigerated truck or on the news or something, hearing about it in too much detail, those aren't, you're not removed from it. Empathy, the sight especially, hearing is bad enough, but sight especially, even remote through a computer, you suddenly feel as if that was your family. What is their family feeling like? What is, if that was a brother, a sister? So you have an emotional response. Now, depending upon what you have other themes, which other themes are in your mix, depends on what you do with that. Includer, you feel it and may want to take action. There may be certain actions. It may drive you then to, because you have a feeling, if you don't take action on it, you may feel like it's frustrating. Kind of like intellection that has no way to process its thinking, learner has no way to apply it. Includer needs to do something. And so empathy, they communicate focused on people, they decision make, again, what will be the best for people. The dark side is the inability, the dark side, inability to separate your feelings from others. If you can't separate out your feelings, you're basically constantly having emotions that you can do nothing about. That is the problem. That's why you have to limit what comes in, because too much information coming in, because again, it's not your feelings, it's mine, it's my situation. So your body's having feelings it can't correct or fix. So for empathy, you communicate focused on people, you naturally understand you're an emotional thermometer. But for includer, just give those same beats as I'm finishing up here. When it comes to communicating, You communicate for the outsider. In a world focused on majorities, hey, we had 85% participation. It is often the includer who then says, but what about the 15%? Oh, look, we had all of this happen. Yeah, but you left out this. For includer, it's not just about people. You'll look at a plan and realize, we haven't thought about this region. We haven't thought about this thing. We haven't thought about this element. And so you see the margin. Decision-making is usually focused on pulling in the margin, meaning the things on the sides. The margin is on the outside, pulling those pieces in. Who's left out? What's not being used? The dark side, though, is you feel like the outsider constantly. Because typically you were one at some point in your life, and you knew how to navigate in to the inner circle. And now, ultimately, no matter how much people tell you you're part of the team, you feel like an outsider. So the good news is you know how to navigate in. The bad news is you could be pushing people away while you desperately want to be included. Feel that tension. You're going, I speak for the outsider, but if your identity is tied up in, but I am an outsider, and you don't know how to pull that in, that's the challenge. And so for includers, to draw people in, but also recognize that you are an insider too now. It's okay. Speak for the outside, but know your position as well. It's not your identity. This has been okay, everybody? This is kind of what we've got through a few more this week. We're gonna keep grinding through these. Tell your friends and neighbors. I'll post this up online if you wanna go back through some of these. But keep me honest, we think about next week, we'll get to a bunch more. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Carlton. Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Mike. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Mike.